Ravelry is often described as the Facebook for knitters, and it wasn't that long ago that it was the hub of the online fiberverse. It's where we found patterns, community, and drama. But all that changed on June 16th, 2020, when Ravelry became the drama. Millions of users logged into Ravelry like they usually do and found that it looked totally different. The era of NuRav began, and it was not pretty. For months, almost a year really, the online fiberverse was kind of in turmoil as reports rolled in of the website now causing eye strain, migraines, and seizures. So hit subscribe, give this video a thumbs up, grab a project and knit with me as we look at Ravelry 5 years later. Hello, welcome to my channel. My name is Carrie Craft Geek, and if you are new here, this is where I talk about making pretty things with pretty string, usually with 2 sticks. And 5 years ago when I first started my channel, the hot goss that I first discussed was Ravelry's redesign. Talked about so much that it got to the point where we were like, we don't want to talk about this anymore, and I just started calling it the website that shall not be named. But before I get into the whole history of what happened, how we got there, let me tell you about the project I'm going to be working on in today's video. This here is a finished example of what I'm making right now. This I call Rosie's dishcloth because this is the dishcloth pattern that my grandmother Rosie was always knitting. And it's just a very old medallion dishcloth pattern. She got a copy of the pattern way back in the day and it got passed down to me, and so this is my version of it. I did write up directions to this pattern. I will have a link to a free PDF down in the description box, as well as the materials that I use to make my dishcloth. I'm a huge fan of Lily's Sugar and Cream. It's a 100% cotton yarn. It's not like the softest cotton in the world, but it's inexpensive and it's perfect for a project like this. These dishcloths are so sturdy. They totally stand the test. Like, we use these in my kitchen every single day. They last for years, and it's because this yarn is so sturdy. If you do click on one of my tags or an affiliate link to do any shopping, I might earn a small commission, and this helps support my channel. It helps me buy materials for review, for demonstration, and for the services that I need to have a viable YouTube channel. So if you utilize one of my product tags or affiliate links to do any of your crafting shopping, thank you so much. It is so greatly appreciated. All right, so enough about me and my pattern and my links, and let's talk about me and Ravelry. So I first heard of Ravelry in 2011 when I was on my honeymoon cruise in the Mediterranean. I had met another knitter on board, and one day she just said to me, "Have you ever heard of Ravelry?" I was like, "No, what's Ravelry?" And she told me, oh, it's this amazing place where you can find all these patterns, and it's where knitters gather, and there's all these forums. And I mean, it sounded amazing. I've got a knot here. What's going on? Gotta work out this knot. There we go. All right, where was I? Okay, so I wanted to run to a computer and look it up right away. But I couldn't because I was in the middle of the Mediterranean. So I had to wait till after my honeymoon was over and we got home. But when we did, probably that first night, I looked up Ravelry and I joined, and my mind was blown. Before Ravelry launched in 2007, there was a very online knitting, crochet, fiberverse, yarny world. But it was very dispersed. It really was a series of blogs and web rings, and there were some bigger websites like Knitty.com used to have its own forums on their website. But when Ravelry came online, it very quickly became the center of the online fiber space. like Knitty.com shut down their own forums and just moved on to Ravelry. Make-alongs were happening on Ravelry. Even if drama popped off on other platforms like Facebook or Instagram, it almost always would start or end or be followed on Ravelry. One of my early videos that got really popular was me telling the story of mystical creation yarns, and a large part of my research was reading through the Ravelry forums that tracked that story, and it's still there to this day. Real-time dramas that would go back on would happen on Ravelry. Forget Twitter, it would happen on Ravelry. In 2013, there was a knitting convention in UK called Stitch Camp UK, and famously, right, one of the teachers that went to this convention to give classes got to Heathrow Airport and got kicked out of the country because their work permit wasn't in order. And she started posting to Ravelry about what was going on, and all of it went down in real time on Ravelry. And all of this is just to kind of give you an idea of how important Ravelry was. Ravelry just really drove conversation in the online fiberverse. That being said, Ravelry wasn't necessarily the center of my knitting life. I was a fairly casual user. I found the website, for all of its amazing capabilities, was kind of clunky, kind of hard to navigate. Also, the aesthetics were very dated. Like, I'll put up a picture here of like the original design of the Ravelry website. It was dominated by like pale green and bright pink color scheme, which actually I like that because pink and green is like a favorite of mine, but it was a little dated, and the layout and the whole feel of it is very late 90s, early 2000s. So it was understandable when word got out in 2019 that the people at Ravelry were looking at redesigning the website, because it did need a fresh coat of paint, if nothing else. So it's June 2020 and the world is shut down from the pandemic. And you know, it's interesting to think about it now, because on the one hand, it feels so far away, and so much of it almost feels like a blur, and yet at the same time, I still feel that time period in my body. And, you know, we were all just like at home, trying to like not go crazy. And a lot of knitters got very online during this period of time. I myself was starting my YouTube channel, and I was knee deep in knitting Twitter. So on the morning of June 16th, knitting Twitter was on fire. Everyone had gone to bed with Ravelry looking the same as it ever did. There was a kind of a tease, an announcement that they had something coming, but nobody knew what it was about. And then they wake up the next morning or hit the refresh on the page at the right time, and suddenly Ravelry looked totally different. Pink and green were gone. It was a whole new color scheme. The splash page had these new animated characters on the landing page. There was just the whole thing was new. Now, I would say the first wave of response was just to the changes in the aesthetics themselves. Some people really liked them, some people really hated them. My personal reaction when I saw NuRav was I felt like it was kind of a clunky attempt at an updated aesthetic. Like, they had obviously cleaned up the page, made things whiter, like very, very white. It still didn't feel like a modern website at the same time. There were things about it that were still really dated. The thing that always sticks out to me, like a sore thumb, was a lot of the buttons were now like this cyan blue that I associate with like 1990s computer and websites. It was this cyan blue on a very stark black highlight. It was ugly, okay? Like, there's a lot of things about NuRav, frankly, just aesthetically speaking, that I think that they could have refined, and they just, I feel like, stubbornly have stayed the course with whatever original vision that they cooked up. In a way, I think that was like a sign of where things go with Ravelry, because if the issue with NuRav was just the aesthetics, the whole thing would have died down pretty quickly, and they never would have talked about it in a New Yorker article. That, at the end of the day, was not what drove the drama around Ravelry and the redesign. What drove it was when people started complaining of physical reactions to the website and how Ravelry handled those reports. So I don't recall what tweet tipped me off that there was something more going on with NuRav than just people liking or disliking the new look of it. But very quickly, word on the hashtags was that for some people, Ravelry and NuRav was triggering eye strain, migraines, and seizures. Now, the eye strain I could kind of understand, because I myself, when I looked at the website on my desktop and how wide it was, I did find it hard to keep looking at after a while. Like, it just tired my eyes. But it was the reports of migraines and seizures that I was like, what? What? Like, is that even possible that a website would cause migraines and seizures? But I held my tongue and I kept listening, because that's what you do sometimes. When people are reporting like physical reactions to things, sometimes you just gotta hold your tongue and listen. After the launch of NuRav, one of the first reports of seizures came from Countess Ablaze. Her Twitter and blog post no longer seem to exist. Otherwise, I'd give you, a screenshot of it. But I did find an article referencing it, and you can find a link to that article down in the description box, as well as all my other sources. But there was at least 8 more reports of people saying that they experienced seizures after being on Ravelry. There was enough documented reports and written complaints that on July 2nd, the Epilepsy Foundation issued a warning. It read, "Members of our epilepsy community have expressed concerns about content on knitting and crocheting community Ravelry. From what we understand, Ravelry recently made changes to their user interface, which, according to some users, may be affecting people with photosensitivity." I think it's really easy to forget 5 years later how quickly the reports of nausea, migraines, and seizures popped up after NuRav launched. It wasn't kind of this slow rolling, gathering steam of reports. No, it was a very fast moving wave of people commenting, wave of people getting onto other social media platforms saying, hey, I went onto Ravelry and I am suffering pain now. And as it turns out, those complaints started even before the launch. There is on Ravelry a post from someone who claims that they were part of the beta test. I'm going to tell you right now, I'm going to put a screenshot up from Ravelry. If you have a concern about even seeing screenshots from Ravelry, just look away now and I'll let you know with this sound that it is off the screen. So this Ravelry wrote, "Having been invited to participate in beta testing of the new Ravelry look, I have had the opportunity to gradually increase my exposure to the new site design over a period of 6 weeks. Every day, as soon as I switched it on, I turned nauseated and got a lingering headache even after just 1 minute, and I was unable to increase my time at a stretch to more than 10 minutes. The headache stayed for hours." During beta testing, I did give feedback about the design being migraine-inducing, but didn't elaborate about that. I just stated the fact and pointed to the elements of the site design that caused it. When the new layout was made publicly available, I wrote a few short posts explaining that components made this design so migraine triggering. So very quickly after NuRav was launched, there were complaints about the accessibility issues. The most shocking ones that you saw were about the migraines and the headaches, the eye strain, and yes, the few seizures. But there were other accessibility issues that people were upset about as well, including the lack of support for screen readers, animations on the login page that you couldn't shut off was a big complaint. The high contrast of the very black text on a very bright, stark white background. That for me was, I think, something that was even causing me some, I don't want to say eye strain, but certainly some eye fatigue. So how did Ravelry respond to all of this? Well, after NuRav launched and more reports were coming in of people having visual disturbances that they said were being triggered by NuRav, Ravelry did make some changes. The biggest one that they made was turning off the animations. I think everybody was like, hey, part of accessibility is having animations that you can at least toggle off. So that was good. And then they did put an option that you could toggle back to a classic skin for Ravelry. But they made it very clear from the beginning that this was going to be a temporary option, that the plan was once they tweaked some aspects of NuRav to force people to use it after tweaking some of the design elements based on feedback. One way they got that feedback was through what they called a readability survey. I took the survey. God. I have real issues with that survey. In fact, I think I did a whole video about it. Maybe not. Maybe I just did a blog post. But the thing with the survey was that it was, first of all, if you had any issues with NuRav and even looking at screenshots, you wouldn't be able to take the survey because the survey was basically a series of multiple choice options where they would show you like 2 to 4 screenshots of different looks for Ravelry, and you would choose which one you thought looked best, or you would say, see no difference, right? You didn't even have an option to say that you didn't like any of them. And of course, there's a big difference between I don't like any of these options and see no difference. Like, they were boxing you into the choices that they were willing to make. But based on those surveys, Ravelry did make some changes. One of them was to give some customization options. You could choose to use different fonts that were more dyslexic friendly, like Helvetica. Eventually, they rolled out another look for Ravelry that you could use. The first one, the original NuRav, is called Merino, and then they rolled out Herdwick, which was supposed to be like a lower contrast skin. I'll be honest, I personally found Herdwick harder to look at than Merino, but that was my personal experience. And months and months and months later, they rolled out a dark mode, which a lot of people are like, oh, they gave us a dark mode, everything's fine. I find their dark mode to be the hardest to look at. It's not a true black background. Instead, it's like this very deep, deep blue. And then the text, they made it partially transparent. So instead of using just like a lower contrast color for the text, instead they made it partially transparent. And maybe they've changed this since, I don't know. But at the time when I would look at dark mode, the text would be shimmering. Like, it was very unpleasant to me. So Ravelry didn't ignore the reports altogether, but I will say that most of the response was felt at best performative and at worst dismissive. Early blog posts acknowledged there might be readability issues for some users, but that NuRav was an overall improvement for most users. But of course, accessibility isn't about popularity, right? Just because most people might like it doesn't mean that it's accessible. Accessibility is about reducing harm, particularly to vulnerable people. If 90% of your users are liking NuRav, that doesn't mean a lot if 10% can't use the website anymore because they have migraines. And of course, really, Ravelry would never address the issue as an accessibility issue. They always couched it as a readability problem. which I felt like was really them trying to skirt around what was happening. And despite some of the changes that Ravelry made to the website after NuRav launched, it was really clear they weren't really interested in having open dialogue with Ravelers about the accessibility issues. Anytime somebody would post a topic about reacting to NuRav on the Big Six forums, they were shutting those down and they were asking people to instead use the feedback form to give them information and reaction. And frankly, that just felt like you were sending something into the void. But it became very apparent, especially after they launched dark mode, that these were the only changes that Ravelry was willing to make, and they were not going to be accepting the validity of any more reports of migraines or seizures. Like, they were done. And frankly, the discourse then around NuRav probably would have died down because there wouldn't be much new to say about it. Because that's what happens, right? In online discourse. There comes a point where everything you can say is said and you've gotten all the action that you're going to get. However, thanks to a post, an email, and a New Yorker interview, the controversy around NuRav was extended. So I was a pretty casual Ravelry user myself. I looked at it mostly for patterns. Sometimes I would buy a pattern. I had a few patterns in my library. But I was a Ravelry fan before 2020. I felt like it represented the best of the Fiberverse. It was a social media website with millions of users without the trappings of big corporate America or venture capitalists. They were doing everything on their own. I mean, to this day, Ravelry has 5 people on staff and an army of volunteers. Jessica, also known as Mama Rav, one of the owners and founders of Ravelry, described the beginning of Ravelry as a barn raising. Literally hundreds, if not thousands, of people volunteered to enter pattern information into the database to build that database. People donated money so that they could buy a server to house Ravelry. It was very much a community project, and the owners, Cassidy and Jessica, presented Ravelry not so much as a business, but as a community space for fiber-loving people. I would even say it was a parasocial relationship that many users had with the website. They felt like they partially owned it. And why wouldn't people? Because they had been part of building it. So I was, like many Ravelry users, dismayed when I saw Ravelry's rather lukewarm, at best, performative, at best, dismissive response. And it seemed like the staff at Ravelry were more invested in defending their design choices than they were in addressing accessibility concerns. I'm not saying that is the case, all right? I think that if Jessica and Cassidy believed there was something they could have fixed about Ravelry, they would have fixed it. I do believe that. I think the problem is they never believed the accessibility reports to begin with. And when you're coming from that place of skepticism and you're really married to your design choices, it's really hard to go in and say, maybe we have to rethink this more than we want to. And all of this was really driven home when Cassidy, one of the owners and the architect of the amazing database, tweeted this. There's a person on Instagram who has been spreading straight up lies about Ravelry nonstop since we updated the design. The most recent one is that pattern sales are down. No, this has been the best July ever. They were calling somebody on Instagram who was talking about the accessibility problems with Ravelry a liar. And then this email was sent out to some of the people who either sent in complaints or were designers on the website. And unfortunately, some of the people this email was sent to were people who were reporting that they were experiencing adverse physical reactions to NuRav. But I quote, Ravelry's updated design does not cause seizures, migraines, or other medical issues. The Epilepsy Foundation did not find any problems with Ravelry. Angry users started a letter writing campaign, and the foundation published their warning without any verification or research, as appears to be their policy. We have not found any experts, including medical doctors who specialize in this area, who have identified any problems with Ravelry. We have found zero evidence that there is anything about the new design that causes migraines or seizures. I would like people to consider their sources before spreading false information. So this email caused a lot of uproar. People were upset, they were hurt, and rightfully so. I mean, chat, this is not the way you handle it. And the uproar was enough that Jessica then had to post an apology and said that Cassidy was going to be focusing on the technical side of Ravelry moving forward and was no longer going to have access to the customer service system. Yes. Now, I can't speak for everybody about how well taken Jessica's apology was. I'll be honest, again, it felt performative. It felt like, yeah, this is the thing that we got to say to look like we're responding. And I think at least there was a recognition that Cassidy wasn't in the frame of mind to be answering customer service complaints. I don't think it satisfied anybody, but I understand that for Cassidy, I'm sure this was extremely stressful and extremely hurtful, and I don't want to minimize her own stress and distress during all this tumult. But the fact is, you just chat. You don't send out an email like that. But after Jessica's apology regarding Cassidy's email went out, I think the whole thing would have sort of died down. Everybody kind of retreat to their own corners of the online world, if not for the New Yorker's March 2022 article about Ravelry and some of the quotes Jessica and Cassidy gave about the NuRav situation. It's interesting because the New Yorker article was actually more about Ravelry's stance about MAGA than it was about issues around NuRav, but the topic did come up. And when it did, the things that were quoted in the article kind of confirmed for everybody what they had suspected all along. I'll quote. So the really hard thing is that migraines and seizures are caused by so many different things. And especially in this time of extreme uncertainty, we made certain mistakes. Putting out a redesign in the midst of a pandemic when people were already on edge, and because people are so passionate about Ravelry, I think they intensely switched over. You know what I mean? That level of intensity, of love and passion for the site, and feeling like they were a part of it, they felt betrayed, which I totally get. That's right. That's right. People just love Ravelry so much that a change in color scheme caused so much stress they had migraines and seizures. You might say some Ravelers became hysterical. Unfortunately, I think that just some of Jess's belief that this was all just a big stress response to what was happening in the world was bolstered by a July 6, 2020 article that appeared in Psychology Today discussing the claims about seizures and migraines being triggered by Ravelry's new design. The Psychology Today article claimed there was nothing wrong with the website and, quote, given that the most likely explanation for these reports of illness may be mass suggestion and the redefinition of various ailments as Ravelry related. The phenomenon referenced in the Psychology Today article is called mass psychogenic illness. Now, I'm not a psychologist or an MD or a medical anthropologist like the gentleman who wrote this article, but to me, that sounds like fancy words for mass hysteria. Because of course, if a group of people who are mostly women, are reporting physical adverse reactions to something for which you don't understand, it must be that they're just hysterical. All of these users who 5 years later still report that they can't use the website because NuRav still triggers the same physical reactions. Yeah, can't possibly, must just be all in their heads. The upshot for many people, including myself, was the New York article was kind of the final nail in the coffin of their relationship with Ravelry. And I myself, I don't know if it was at this time or I think it might have been when Cassidy sent out the email, I actually deleted my original Ravelry account. I admit I now have kind of an anonymous account because occasionally I need to do some research on Ravelry because the pattern database is unmatched. And I like to say that I look at Ravelry so you don't have to. And you know, the thing about it is, regardless of whether people are truly experiencing a physical reaction to the website or it's all in their head, the physical reaction is very real. And I think even if we were to entertain for a moment that this was a case of psychogenesis illness, the symptoms were still very real. And I think would only be exacerbated by the fact that it was very apparent from the beginning that they were not being taken seriously. Looking back 5 years later, it's easy to forget how painful all of this around launching NuRav was for the fiber community, because it was painful. There were designers like Tanya Richter who believes that she had a 6-month migraine triggered by using Ravelry, and she pretty much lost her career as an independent knitting designer because she was unable to log on to Ravelry and interact with the back end that designers have for their Ravelry pattern store. She lost her pattern store. You can still find her patterns on for sale on a PayHip site, but I'm not sure the last time she released a new pattern. Other people were cut off from online communities that they had been a part of for years and had developed real relationships with the people in those forums. And in a time in 2020 when so many people felt isolated in the world, to lose that point of contact with any type of community was even more devastating, right? And the scars from that experience runs deep. We don't talk about it a whole lot anymore, but when the topic comes up, you can still see the pain there. In fact, after my video where I said the website that shall not be named, I did put out like a kind of a cheeky post going, wow, 5 years later, people seem to have either don't know or have forgotten about what happened with Ravelry and accessibility. And people who lived through that time, like I did, came out of the woodwork to talk about how like, nope, they haven't forgotten. They still have problems using the website. They still have physical adverse reactions. They're still upset with Ravelry. That pain is very real. And I think the truth is that the relationship the Fiberverse has with Ravelry has changed since the launch of NuRav. I think more and more people don't see it as the center of the online Fiberverse. Rather, it's more of a pattern database and marketplace. Don't get me wrong, there are still people who use the forums and the groups heavily. There's still a lot of social media activity that happens on Ravelry, but certainly not to the point that it was pre-June 2020. It used to be when drama went down, it started and ended on Ravelry. Now it pops off in any number of places. And I think that's because now the online knitting and fiber community is more diffused. We're not all gathered in one place. We're on Instagram, we're on TikTok, we're on YouTube, or we're siloed off on a Discord server. And that to me is the tragedy of NuRav. A redesign that was supposed to give Yarnies a better Ravelry experience ended up fracturing the entire community. And I don't think we're ever really gonna be able to go back to those times. Here's the good news. Knitters, crocheters, spinners, weavers, we're still here. Our craft is as vibrant as ever and attracting new people into this community all the time. Even though for a time Ravelry was the center of the Fiberverse community, the community was always built by us and for us. So if we're dispersed across multiple platforms, it doesn't mean we're still not here, caring and sharing and arguing sometimes with one another. And as long as we keep making pretty things with pretty string, the Fiberverse online and in real life carries on. In the meantime, here is where I am with my dishcloth. I admit I did not get very far because I kept making mistakes in this wedge and having to frog back. Frogging is part of knitting. That being said, I am doing 2 wedges in purple, but I might still introduce the yellow. I can't decide. Let me know down in the comments below. What do you think? All purple or purple and yellow two-tone? I hope that you enjoyed today's video. If so, please make sure to give it a thumbs up and share it with your other fiber-loving friends. Liking, sharing, commenting are all ways it really helps support the channel. It's one of the things that lets the YouTube algorithm know that, hey, people like this channel. In fact, lately, I just cannot believe the growth I've been seeing lately. I am blown away, and it is 100% because of your support, my subscribers' support, both old subscribers and new subscribers. Thank you so much. You know what? I need to eat lunch, so I'm gonna head out now. If, however, you are not ready to say goodbye, no worries. Right about now, a video suggestion is going to pop up for something else that you can watch with me. So I will meet you there. Otherwise, I hope that you have a wonderful day, evening, weekend, weeknight, whenever you might be watching this. And as always, happy health and happy making. Bye.